Good morning, everybody. To extend Geoff's comments of this morning, it was quite interesting. Maybe most of you have seen it, but to see a Provenge commercial on TV while you're getting ready in the morning was, for me, somewhat of a milestone. But, well, anyway, I'd like to welcome everybody to this first panel at the MESA meeting. My name's Phil Vanek. I'm General Manager of Cell Bioprocessing for GE Healthcare. And the panel today will be addressing the topic of the global impact of regenerative medicine and our current healthcare systems positioned to maximize the benefit of these technologies. Now, before I go into the introductions of the panel, just wanted to kind of drill down a little bit and scope our discussion, because that is a very ambitious topic to discuss, right? There's a lot of information, a lot of influencers, whether it's payers, providers, et cetera. So rather than going in and trying to tackle everything, we wanted to give some scope to this. So if one of our assumptions is that the common tenet of healthcare systems is to provide care, whether it's diagnostic, therapeutic, medicines, or hands-on, whatever, that is safe and effective, that is affordable, and that is widely available, we agreed before this session to really just focus on the affordability and focus on the wide availability. Pardon. The reason for doing that is the safety and effectiveness of these therapies will be tackled at a number of other sessions during this meeting. Our FDA is shut down, so they can't weigh in on the topic of the safety and other regulatory elements. So we're going to set that aside to the extent possible, let our speakers discuss if it impacts their particular comment. They can obviously wade into that territory. But we'd ask everybody to think about this topic subject from the perspective of affordability and availability. It is oversimplifying, we acknowledge that, but I think it gives us a place to work from. So we are fortunate to have a very distinguished panel from around the world, not only from 5 countries represented here, but also from a wide variety of different types of organizations. So without further ado, what I'll do is ask each of the speakers to introduce themselves and a little bit about their background and the organization, and in particular, the type of organization. And then when we'll get into the question and answer period, we'll have an opportunity for them to go into a bit more depth. And then we will also be leaving about 15 minutes towards the end for audience questions. So, please.
Okay. Geoff, MacKay, President and CEO of Organogenesis, which is a commercial stage cell therapy company. We have 2 cell therapies that are FDA approved, Apligraf, indicated for venous leg ulcers and diabetic foot ulcers, and we ship about 100,000 units of Apligraf a year, and so that's really becoming a standard of care for recalcitrant chronic wounds. And then more recently, we have a cell therapy called Gentuit, which is FDA approved, and then that's the first allogeneic product to be FDA approved through the CBER process, and that's for oral soft tissue regeneration, so oral surgery to induce soft tissue in the palate area.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Michael May. I'm the President and CEO of the Center for Commercialization of Regenerative Medicine. It's based in Toronto, Canada. It's a translation center, kind of a hybrid venture model focused on technology development and company creation. So we bring together the leading institutions in Canada and from outside of Canada with access to their intellectual property to bundle that intellectual property into new companies, but also have an industry consortium of 30 companies that we work on problems of their business to generate new IP. So we work with companies and create companies, and another part of our mission is to accelerate clinical trials and the delivery of cell therapies in the Canadian context. Some of the unique features of the Canadian system: it's a single-payer system. Regulatory approval is federal jurisdiction. Reimbursement is provincial jurisdiction. Canada is a very small market, although it has a lot of capacity to advance these technologies.
Well, hello, everybody. Keith Thompson, the CEO of the Cell Therapy Catapult, which is the new translational centre in the UK for cell therapies. It's been set up for about just over a year now, and we have a very similar focus to Michael in that we are a business-led translational centre. We've set ourselves up to address the big business questions, health economics, reimbursement, the manufacturing and supply questions, reliability, cost of goods, getting things ready into the CMC package, and lastly, clinical and regulatory. So it's a kind of end-to-end storybook of all the problems or all the barriers to commercialization that we're addressing, we can either invest in therapies directly and bring them out of academia and get them to the state where they're de-risked enough for private investment, or we can work with companies in a collaborative fashion, leveraging grants from the UK or Europe, or lastly, we can do straightforward contract research. So our job is really to create that industry and kind of get the critical mass up and deal with many of the issues that we're going to talk about today about how do you actually get these things into clinical use. My personal background prior to doing this for the last year or so was 8 years running the Scottish Blood Transfusion Service, and prior to that ran several biotechs here and in the US. I was with Serologicals, which was bought by Millipore and then Merck, so my background's all in biomanufacturing and cell culture and what have you.
Thank you, Tony.
Hi, good morning. My name is Tony Lee from MEDIPOST. I'm CEO of MEDIPOST America, which is a entity established in the US, 100% a subsidiary company owned by the MEDIPOST parent company, which is based in South Korea. We have developed a human umbilical cord blood-derived mesenchymal stem cell allogenic product approved by Korean FDA last year, January 2012. The product is actually for cartilage regeneration for degenerative osteoarthritis. And that went into the market in Korea since May last year, and we've been on the market with about 40 patients treated on market, and it's not currently reimbursed, and I'd like to discuss some of that issue during the panel. And we are established here, we're running a US FDA IND cleared trial in the US, phase 1/2A with the same product, as well as other products earlier pipeline in Korea, which includes some of the respiratory failure for prematurely born infants, and also Alzheimer's disease trial, which are both finished phase 1 in Korea. So we're excited to bring that technology over here and also eventually to Europe and other big markets, and that's what my role is, and we'll be happy to engage in the discussions.
Hi, my name is Suzuki. I'm from MEDINET. I'm a CEO and president of the company. The MEDINET involved in the clinical practice of the immunotherapy for cancer patient. And our business model is a little different from other countries, the case. And we involved in one of the part of the medical services. We participate as a contract manufacturer for the medical institutions, especially within their site. And recently, we are in Japan discussing a new regulatory framework. Later on, I will show you the 2 slides, what kind of things going on in Japan. But anyway, with new regulatory framework, MEDINET will change the direction to the marketing approval process. At this moment, we have no marketing approval, but involving providing medical practice of the immunotherapy in Japanese market.
Would you like to present the 2 slides now?
Yeah.
Can you pull up the slides for Suzuki-san? Thank you.
Okay, next. Hello. In Japan, we are now discussing the framework, which is part of the medical service law, and a Japanese government decided without any marketing approval process under the pharmaceutical affairs law, there must be a new legal framework which can be provided to the patient. And the type of the technology should be divided into 3. You can see from the left, high risk and medium risk and low risk part. Then using a certain level of the committees, authorized committee for regenerative medicine. Then if the technology is approved by the committees, the plan of the therapies to be submitted to the Ministry of Health. That is the one thing. Next. Second thing is you may know the early approval system or accelerated approval system. The pioneer everywhere in the world comes from Korea in this type of the regulative framework. And the Japanese government also introduced a new type of the conditional approval. In the past, it was approved through the from a P1 to a P3, then a P4 type of the approval, same with drug approval. But to fit to the nature of the regenerative medicine or cellular therapies, the so-called adaptive licensing type of the approval should be introduced. And if we can use this kind of process, I believe we can avoid any unnecessary time and effort to provide the new technology or advanced technology to the patient. Our mission is to provide nice therapies to save life or to tackle with a disease for the patient. That's it.
Very good. Thanks. Well, that's a very good jumping off point. I think anything that demonstrates the willingness of shortening the regulatory cycles, the approval times, getting these medicines to the patients that need them desperately, faster, more efficiently, will do quite a bit to move things forward. So coming back to the question, and we'll begin with the comment about affordability. I'd really like to encourage this as a conversation, not just as a question and answer period. But I think it's worthwhile spending a moment or two to kind of really understand when we talk about the healthcare system, who are the stakeholders that we're really talking about? And Geoff, you have some products on the market right now. What's your experience been? Who are the key stakeholders addressing affordability?
So I guess I'm about to reach my 10-year anniversary in the U.S. from Canada. So and it's taken me that long to start to understand the U.S. healthcare system.
It's changing.
Yeah. Just in time for my understanding. Now it's going to migrate, and that's one of my key points: is that you can answer the question in this current fee-for-service model, and we can talk about that. And so I'll do that first, but then we will have to talk about healthcare reform, because for those people that have products in development, by the time they get them to the market, it will be a very, very different healthcare system. But in today's world, the majority of cell therapies will probably be approved through CBER and be reimbursed largely by Part B Medicare, as an outpatient procedure. Now, that's not uniform, and it depends on the therapeutic indication. But for us, for example, the majority of our technologies in wound healing are Part B Medicare. 3/4 of patients are reimbursed through that. And I think a large percentage of Dendreon, for example, goes through that, and so that process needs changing. It's favorable to us, but I think what it doesn't really adequately address is the issue of affordability, and that's one of the reasons that the fee-for-service model must change. Is that it incentivizes work as opposed to outcomes. But in today's world, when you have something that you want to get approved, upon getting FDA approval, you have to apply for a HCPCS code and a CPT code to get the product and the procedure code, and that can take about a year. And so that doesn't address the issue of affordability. That's just whatever you care to charge, you will get that code. Subsequent to that, payment for the procedure, it tends to be determined by the RUC committee, which is controlled by the American Medical Association. So they go into a room and they try to determine how much a procedure should be paid, and they look at what is the time required for the procedure and what is the intensity of the procedure. So debriding a diabetic foot is less intense than brain surgery, so it would get paid less even if it takes the same amount of time. So that's payment. And then coverage, and that's the first issue. That's where affordability starts to rear its head, is coverage often in Part B Medicare is from central CMS almost, they don't call it this, but it's like it's outsourced to local MACs, local Medicare coverage payers. And it's only down at this local level. And by local, it could mean like Trailblazers, which covers the majority of Texas. So big geographies. But these local payers have a P&L, so it's at that point where some types of barriers can occur. And that the challenge is, unlike some healthcare systems where there's a formal health economic review, at this point in time, it's less formal. It's based mostly on budgetary constraints. And so there's just an ongoing effort to try to lobby to demonstrate the value, to involve clinicians to lobby to make sure that access is granted. So that's today.
Well, I think that's a topic we'll revisit several times during this panel. Keith, I'm going to jump to you for a minute because the UK has been quite outspoken and has had lots of dialogue with practicing clinicians, with the people doing the research and development about the same topic. Do you want to comment a little bit on the stakeholders in the UK?
Sure. There's been a great deal of, if you like, investment from government through the research councils into the field. Many hundreds of millions have gone into it, and there are a lot of potential products and therapies, either in trial, near to trial, or some way back. I think we put together a database last year, and there was around about 70-odd trials or things which were 2 years away from that. So that kind of reflects the kind of investment over the last 10 or 15 years in the field. And there's no doubt in my mind that government has supported this. In fact, government says that regenerative medicine is one of the 8 great technologies for exploitation and commercialization in the UK. So there's a very high-level cross-party support for the field. And they really have put together a lot of things, specifically for regenerative medicine, but also for the broader innovation in health and wealth. So by having the NHS as a single system, although you shouldn't get carried away with the idea that everybody in the NHS is all marching to the same tune. Everyone thinks it's like a great big whale swimming in one direction. It's more like a shoal of fish where half of the fish are going in different directions. So once you understand that, that makes it a little bit easier to navigate. So the NHS is there, the interested clinicians are there. There's biomedical research centres which have been specifically funded through the National Institute of Health Research with about 800 million across all products in there. So you've got a lot of investment in research. You've got specific mechanisms through the policies of innovation, health and wealth to encourage research and adoption, because they do believe that the right products will make a contribution to the economy, both directly through growing jobs, but also by making people more productive. So we also have the National Institute of Clinical Excellence, which does the health technology assessments, the health economics, and recommends whether things should be adopted and paid for, and what the health gains are. It's a really rigorous process. Some people don't like it because their products don't always get through, but nevertheless, it's an open, transparent process. The House of Lords, which is, if you like, the upper chamber of the parliamentary system in the UK, recently had an inquiry into regenerative medicine, and they made a number of recommendations, and there's been a government response to that. Catapult's responded to it about how these things will be assessed. The National Institute of Clinical Excellence, NICE, says that it has all the mechanisms to deal with potentially expensive therapies that have long-lasting impacts. But of course, there's very few of them coming out the other end that they can actually apply all of this to. So they've made a commitment to work on this. The other sort of groups that are involved, obviously patient advocacy groups, but commissioners. They have specialist commissioning groups, so specialist commissioners can target in on
low volume, high specialty things, which a lot of our products will be. So I think that all of the elements are there, and there's a great deal of will to make it happen. They've also, government has agreed to set up a national regenerative medicine expert group to make sure that the NHS is ready to adopt these technologies, and the catapult will be playing a major role in that. So, you know, I think what's really needed, though, is good therapies to test the system, right? So the more things that go through, the less theoretical issues will be addressed, and more the practical things about how these can get on board.
Gotcha. So I would like to drill down a little bit deeper now and talk about some of the other cost drivers that are staring us all in the face. We have conversations about these all the time. And for Michael, for you, your organization has a very large interest in the scalability of therapies, bringing these to a commercially viable production level, maintaining all of the other safety. And we all know we have to work on these things all at the same time, right? You have to work on the scaling, the safety, the reimbursement. All these are problems that rear their head all the time. Would you comment on, are we taking a leap of faith that these are going to be scalable to get the cost down that will be acceptable by our current health system?
You know, I don't think it's a leap of faith because we've seen it before with other, paradigm-shifting technologies. But I think that manufacturing and the cost of manufacturing is going to be a key driver of affordability, and this is an area that we can all work on together. For example, the CCRM is building a GMP facility so that these new therapies, as they either developed by small companies or large companies or with researchers, where we can look at the bioprocessing and the optimization and the scale-up at earlier stages and look at the whole process as a commercialization process, not just a drive to phase 1 clinical trials. So I think that manufacturing may be the key driver in the affordability. We'll have to figure out the health economics. If we get cures, it's an easy formula. But everything in between is going to require a much more coordinated evaluation of the benefits versus the cost of these therapies.
Great. So, Tony, I'm going to come to you next. I have a quick question for you about some of the other stakeholders in this topic, and those would be the patients. Is there, in Korea, a wide recognition that these therapies are coming? Is there a wide demand? Are you starting to get that groundswell of anticipation?
Right, sure. Let me just start by giving a bit of background. So in South Korea, Korean FDA had established a guideline that followed quite closely to the US FDA CBER guidelines and also EMA guidelines for the control of cell therapy products as medicinal products. So and beginning of last year, KFDA approved 3 products. One allogenic, which is our product, human umbilical cord blood derived mesenchymal stem cell for the knee cartilage defects. The other 2 products were autologous product for AMI and then autologous for Crohn's disease. So the 3 products come on the market. Ours had the biggest market size potential and also being allogenic product. We went ahead and then launched the product in May 2012 as a pharmaceutical product with a BLA, Biologics License Application by KFDA, and that has since been treating 630 patients so far and non-reimbursed. And the issue about getting into a national health grid, insurance grid in Korea is that you need to do 2 things. You have to obviously get a pharmaceutical drug registration by the KFDA, or now they've changed the name to Ministry. They got upgraded to Ministry of Food and Drug Safety. What that means is they can actually put a legislature or the new bill to the parliament to actually change the law. Now that is pertinent because if in Korea, unless your product has got a designation of a new drug, that means in an old framework of things, it means new chemical or molecular entity, then you will not be able to access the COG reimbursement or the R&D reimbursement category, which means you can actually charge higher price for the drugs. So otherwise, unless you get a new drug classification, you won't be able to get a premium on the health insurance grade. So you'll have to be selling at a substantially discounted price. But no cell therapy product has yet to be designated as a new drug because they haven't had any example before. So we're doing a lobbying right now with the Ministry of Food and Drug Safety, that's the former KFDA, so that we could have that designation basically established so that we can go into that system. And they're looking at this favorably right now, understanding the situation and just really communicating with them. And this was the case during our phase 1, 2, and 3 clinical trials prior to our BLA with KFDA, was that they were putting a lot of manpower and streamlined approach to process and learn about the, I guess, unique nature of the cell therapy products, and then communicating with industry players like us. And then it was really the pathfinding. And so they're consulting their regulatory colleagues at EMA, also FDA, and so forth, but they're also talking to us, really trying to pathfind. And I think we're seeing the similar pathfinding activity in the reimbursement sector.
So Suzuki-san, earlier you were presenting a little bit about the shortcutting, or I hate to say the term shortcutting, but streamlining those regulatory paths. In Japan, my understanding has been historically that it has been largely attached to hospitals. Right? Each hospital has its own collection, its own processing center, and there's not a lot of transport from one hospital to another, not necessarily a lot of collaboration between the hospitals. Has the health system driven a bit more collaborative environment in Japan?
Yes. Okay. 2-3 years ago, the collaboration between the hospital and the hospital has been approved. But at this time, corporate cannot be involved directly. We cannot get any contract manufacturing from the hospitals. Hospital can only ask to someone from the medical institution, hospital side. But with the new regulatory framework, we call it the Regenerative Medicine Act or something like that. That new regulation will allow corporate involved directly with the hospitals. So it is very strange, maybe everywhere in the world, if you can do the similar things everywhere in the world. But Japanese government didn't allow corporate to do so. So therefore, with the new regulations, the cell processing process will be streamlined and making a cost to be reduced. So that benefit to the price of the therapies. That means affordability will be improved, especially for the patient payment.
Great. Sorry. So, before we jump on to the question of availability and some of the more structural or infrastructural elements of the healthcare systems, and are those structures in place to help support the future of this industry? Does anybody have any last comments on the affordability? Okay.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I would thoroughly encourage people to assess is to try to understand early on in the development cycle what the health systems are capable of paying, right, through these mechanisms. So to understand what that value might be very early on will give you a guide as to what your target cost of goods has to be. And if the value is only modest, you're going to have rock bottom prices, or you shouldn't be in the game. Right? As attractive as the technology is, you need to make that assessment. If there's a big price in it, and you've got a big cost of goods, then your margin is going to be driven from that. This is all stating the obvious, frankly, but so many people fail to understand that because they really see the end price as a factor of what their development cost was and the manufacturing cost. And if those two don't meet, if the health gain doesn't meet up, you're going to spend a lot of dollars for a nasty shock at the end of the process.
So
I just would add to that. And I think it's not by accident that you see these two new innovative translational models, that are business head and that are talking about these issues. And I think that that's an advance for our field, is that we as a field have got that wrong for so long and have addressed it late, and it's really held us back. And I think that the price that you can charge for a new medicine is relative to the value that you deliver, of course, but that there are price constraints that are arriving now, and they're going to be much more intense in 5 or 10 years. So I think the name of the game is really going to be delivering affordable, cost-effective, and convenient, which is we'll get to, healthcare modalities. And I think for us, there's also this perception in regenerative medicine that the process is the product, therefore you can't change the process. And I think over the last 10 years, we've implemented 50 process changes, which are really designed to make our product more consistent, improve the yield, improve the margin, and to be able to deliver something at a price point that makes economic sense, so that it's not just for the privileged, it's for the masses. And I think that the decisions that are made early are going to dictate how much you're able to do that.
Can I just add to that? I think what Keith had made comment, and Geoff also, about you have to understand what's the reimbursable size of your market. And I think what we're experiencing in Korea right now is, because of the fact, obviously, when you want to go into national health insurance grid, you need to do a health economic data analysis. And that becomes very difficult for when you only have small cases, because naturally you have a smaller size clinical trial that is required by FDAs. And in Korea, we've done this, and we are now engaging with other markets, but still the pool for meta-analysis or for general health economic data analysis is very, very difficult. So that it becomes a very big challenge for us to really go and convince the payers or national payers to listen to us. And I think one way so we can potentially overcome that, and obviously as a sponsor, you want to minimize the size of the trial as much as you can, where with a small number of patients you can get away with. But so the one way to get over that is the regulatory harmonization or harmonization of regulatory framework between the countries, especially coming from a company from a very small market such as South Korea and looking at outside into other Asian markets, potentially to US and Europe. That regulatory framework harmonization or being able to share the data, especially clinical data, between the countries is very, very important, I think. And also the movement that's coming from, for instance, Japan right now about the early access programs. And I think that they're the key examples of how the regulators should talk to each other, especially if you're coming from a small country. And I think we can benefit from that.
Great. So now to transition over to the question of widely available. Again, it's coming a bit more to this idea of infrastructure, the health systems, delivery systems. Keith, you and I have had this conversation a couple times. I want to throw out a bit of a provocative question to make this transition, because as I'm listening to all the comments here, and I'm thinking about the size of the market and the access into these markets, is the competitive way we're setting this up, we're all going after similar indications with very similar cell types at times. Could we not transform the availability and the affordability if there was some more, I'll use the term co-opetition, early stage, pre-competitive arrangement where we can then feed products into the system? And I throw that out. I understand it's a bit of a third rail. Lots of our livelihoods depend on this, but I'll just put that out there. Is there a model that could work where we can get drugs and cell therapies out more efficiently? Nobody wants to touch that one.
Well, I think what Tony is saying about having more harmonization and have true collaboration among the regulatory authorities would achieve both of those things. And so that's a good example where there's little risk to the competitive nature of the companies as having that harmonization.
I'll make a comment to allow the others to think a bit. So I think that's something that the Alliance of Regenerative Medicine is trying to navigate, and it's very tough when you have people that are competing. We're all in it for the patients, we're all in it for innovation, and to make regenerative medicine a standard of care, but we do have competing interests. So I think in that, if you accept that, and then in that context, what can we work on together? And I think working on potency assay guidelines is an example. Trying to work together to make the FDA CBER regulatory process transparent, predictable, efficient. Not so much to subvert it, but but I think that we all benefit if it can become more predictable. So there are a number of issues that we can collaborate together on to go a step further. Is can we actually combine product development? I defer to others.
Yeah, I'll talk about it for a minute now. The whole idea of the catapult and some of these other places like Michael's place in Canada is that by working on these processes in manufacturing, say, or potency assays, we will learn things of general applicability. So whilst an individual's intellectual property might be protected there, and you have to be able to protect the intellectual property, whether it's in the cell, the process, increasingly in the process, or in other words, otherwise, you know, you're going to struggle when you get to market with protecting that position and paying back for that innovation. If we're working on an assay with a company, for instance, generally speaking, if it's a collaboration, then the IP will be protected around that specific field. But things of generic utility, we would want to be able to push it out into the field generally, because everybody will benefit from that. You know, I completely agree with all the kind of regulatory stuff and what have you. Even down to getting all of the mechanisms by which, say, an IPS cell line would be approved and tested. You know, we're all in this boat together. We don't want different sort of standards around the world. We want to try to work up common, pragmatic standards that will allow people to just invest with known levels of risk. That's where we're trying to get to. Right. Known levels of risk.
Okay. I mean, the existence of translation centers like the two of ours provide an opportunity to have that cooperation kind of one step away from the truly competitive companies. And certainly we have a number of projects that we're working on that will achieve that, whether it's working on the manufacturing or on some of the regulatory issues. We, with ARM and others, we being the two of our organizations, and ARM led a few workshops on MSC manufacturing issues, looking at terminology and potency assays and source of cells. And I think those will all, the more that we do together, the more critical mass we build together, the more attention we'll get of the regulatory authorities, the more we'll deal with these issues. And as products get on the market and are successful, we will build momentum, and so, these issues will be solved.
Right. I think one of the other things, just to add to that, with the collaboration that we have with GSK, for instance, GSK, like most huge pharmaceutical companies, they've got an interest in the space. It's modest but growing. They know it's coming, but internally, if you look back over 20 years, most pharmaceutical companies, the small molecule mindset. Some adopted biologicals earlier than others, and they had to learn how to do that, how to get biologicals through their CMC committees. And they want to learn how to get a cell-based therapy through their CMC committees. And therefore, having mechanisms that clearly demonstrate that will actually be good for the industry, because it will trigger more and more investment, because it essentially de-risks the process for the hundreds of millions that will flow from big pharma.
Right. Suzuki-san.
Yes. At this moment, during the discussion with the government officials for the new regulatory framework in Japan, we always face a problem with the concept of the drug or medical devices approval. In order to make international coordination for this regenerative medicine or cellular therapy legal framework, healthcare system, we have to change the concept. We have to away from the concept of the drug approval or medical device approval. We stick to the much more biology side. Scientific area is completely different. Therefore, all over the world, everyone should change our directions. We are away from the drug we always coming back to the CMC, or we always come to the potency assay, or we always come back to the GMP or QMS. Our product is different. So we have to create new concept to fit to the nature of the regenerative medicine or cellular therapy. We suggest all the participants here, they think about the new concept should be introduced. That is my idea.
Well, let's explore that. Can we just explore that a little bit deeper? Let's fast forward 5, 10 years. We've solved the manufacturing problems. We've solved the cell characterization problems, right? 10, 15 years? Yeah. But let's just imagine for a moment. We've solved these problems. What does the world look like? What is the distribution network? Where are these therapies being crafted? What does it look like?
Well, I'm on the beach. I know that.
Exactly. That's right. Yeah. But seriously, it's what's your vision of how this will all flow through the system logistically? How does it flow into the point of care? Are these being manufactured at the point of care? Michael? Your chair didn't slide back.
No. I think it depends. I mean, there are lots of different models for lots of different products here, and when you talk about availability, the regulatory approval and getting it to the market is one piece of that puzzle, but the other is how you deliver these products to the market, and I think it depends. Are they autologous, allogeneic? What kind of infrastructure exists, and so. For many of these products, the business model really hasn't been worked out. And so,
well, the business model, but also we had this conversation earlier, which was asking the question, are the providers of the therapy, are they ready to adopt these therapies? Are the surgeons, are the healthcare professionals, are they clamoring to get these in their hands so they can start administering them? Or is there going to be a lag because of training, and they're going to have to get their arms or minds around what do we do with this stuff?
I think we're learning that in the last few years, again, with the emergence of these translation centers, very focused on regenerative medicine, that we haven't talked to the clinicians enough, and I think that's changing. But I think that's a really important point.
I think, sorry if I just may add to that, I mean, we have this experience of bringing out this product into the market. This is actually designed for orthopedic surgeons. As a first-generation product, it has great limitations, and surgeons, especially among all the other clinicians, want it to be as easy and as simple as possible. So, but that's the barrier of having a first generation of products, because you'll never be perfect. And I think you need to improve upon your CMC and R&D early phase as early as you can to incorporate that and adapt to it for decreasing COG, but also increasing the user friendliness. And that has to be sort of kind of amalgamated into your R&D effort as well. But if I may just make one quick comment just on your previous subject. What we're learning with, I'm just coming back to regulatory again, in regards to the preclinical requirements. Now, with the advancement of scientific knowledge and techniques, that expectations of what we feel, expectations of regulatory authorities, of having amount of data or a scope of data generated for preclinical work is increasing, and that's somewhat natural because you get new techniques coming on board and out in the market and whatnot. And a good example of that of the CBER issuing a guideline, I think December 2012, looking at the tumorigenicity of the cell-based products and so forth. So with that sort of thing, if the regulators are pushing the bars up and higher as we go, we don't have time to catch up from our R&D activity because the advance of science is actually quicker. So I think in that regard, it's really important, from the groups of Alliance for Regenerative Medicine in the US, that really to educate the regulators and the policymakers that as an industry, rather than coming from a specific sponsor or company, that as an industry as a whole, to really educate and communicate with them what is going to be adequate and in a scientifically sound data. Not simply because we can do everything, we should do everything. So I think that sort of action for ARM, especially in this country, is really, really encouraging. And then we'd like to just comment on that.
Want to follow up? Sure.
Yeah, and I just want to give an example of that. Dermograph and Aplograph and Prochymal were all approved in Canada first, and that's not, I think, because Canada has lower standards, but the health authority there really does listen and engage and try to understand the unique features of cell therapy. And And in the next few months, they're going to issue a revised version of the Canadian IND. It's called a clinical trial application that will be based on input from stakeholders, cell therapy specific. So it's trying to outline exactly what preclinical data you need and the animal model data and that. And so I think there are examples of that engagement having a positive influence on the timelines without reducing the standards.
I think for the infrastructural mechanisms in health systems, understanding them is important, and you'll get to understand them during the trial process and working with the clinician. So having worked on the inside in a health system, you can't change things quickly in them. So you need to understand the clinical pathways. The best bits of my career have been involved in finding the easiest path possible, then following it, rather than finding the biggest brick wall and banging my head against it. So if you understand a clinical pathway, you can understand whether the product that you've got or the service that you've got can fit into that pathway. If you can do that, then that's the path of least resistance. And it's more likely to be adopted because the local clinicians will also work with you to make it work. Where you get into the more difficult areas are when the technology is so new and novel that you have to invent both the manufacturing and clinical pathway. And to reflect Michael's point, it depends. An allogeneic therapy that's frozen, that can be thawed out when it's needed, blah 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 blah. That's one end of the model. At the other end of the model, there's a kind of autologous factory in a box kind of model. And you can talk about these things in the abstract sense all the time. It comes back to the issue that by having a decent project, you'll force the clinical pathway and the manufacturing pathway into existence through interested clinicians that are interested in an outcome. So I think these systems will develop haphazardly as products come to market.
So I would just add, I think that there's a lot to learn from the first generation products. I think that I'm not equipped to talk about Dendreon, but just from their public presentations, that there is a different adoption from a urologist than an oncologist, and I think that it's a different equation in their head. I know that for Apligraph and Dermagraft, essentially the value proposition in the head of the surgeon is probably most efficacious modality that they have and least convenient and requires planning and ordering and a more complex process. So, we know that they've adopted all of the above technologies, but it's a different process, and it puts a huge onus on industry to try to facilitate that buying process, to try to make it as easy as possible, to have reimbursement hotline mechanisms, to grow the product and ship it at risk, to eat the obsolescence if they don't use the product. So I think that once you've navigated the product development, got the product approved, then it's how do you make it easy, convenient, reliable, and the unanticipated barriers that all of the companies that I mentioned have run into just have to be addressed real time.
Right. So I think we're a long way away from a cell therapy vending machine or a red box, but I would like to make sure we leave ample time for the audience to ask some questions. So if we can open it up then to the floor and take any questions. Again, I'd like to keep them to affordability and availability, but as you can tell, we've migrated beyond that boundary pretty readily. There's one here. Oh, and please state your name, affiliation, as well as who you're directing the question to, please.
Martin McGlynn, CEO of Stem Cells Inc. Question for Keith. Keith, could you share with the audience some of the ideas and concepts that are being used in the UK by various agencies, including NICE, as to how they calculate the value of a product?
Right. Well, I'm not a health economics expert, but I know it's important. Therefore, we've actually hired somebody from NICE to come into our practice and work with us. But what they will do is they'll have a range of models. So they will want to understand what the standard of care is. Right? So the first thing is, what's the standard of care? The second thing is they'll want to understand what the positive differentiating